It began with a sound, a faint murmur in the darkness. Even I wasn't meant to be at home. That evening, I had a work trip planned, but due to a severe storm that grounded my plane, I had to drive home. Amanda was meant to be out with her closest friend, but the kids were spending the weekend at my mom's house. Grace. It was unnaturally silent when I entered the house, the kind of silence that makes your skin tingle and presses against your ears. When I heard it, I was in the middle of the living room. From upstairs came a muffled, feeble voice. As I stood at the bottom of the stairs listening, I realized it wasn't a TV, even though at first I assumed Amanda must have left it on. It was a discussion. As I slipped up the stairs, my heart was racing. The ancient wood creaked beneath my weight. I had no idea why I was moving stealthily. It's my home. An unidentified unease swirled in my stomach. Our bedroom was where the sounds were coming from. Amanda's tone was unfamiliar to me, but her voice was clear and familiar. A man's voice, followed by a playful, almost mischievous tone. I went cold. What on earth was happening? Something prevented me from demanding answers as I should have. Perhaps my hands trembled as I took out my phone and pressed record. Or perhaps it was the strange desire to get evidence before creating a scene. I listened while leaning against the wall outside the bedroom. It's dangerous, Amanda spoke in a low, excited voice. Tonight he could have been at home. The man chuckled, a deep, informal sound. You decide to merely see him again tomorrow as if nothing had happened after stating that he was out of town. That's the whole idea, isn't it? Amanda responded. The lying bothers me. Simply put, you don't detest this. The man broke off, his voice full of assurance. It was more than I could handle. I pushed the door open as my hand went for the doorknob. The scene struck me in the chest like a sledgehammer. Amanda was perched on the bed's edge, her hair disheveled. She flushed. For a few moments, the smug-looking, broad-shouldered scoundrel leaned on the dresser with a knowing sneer. No one shifted. We felt as though we were trapped in a weird picture. We were all unsure of who would talk first. Amanda's complexion turned white. What are you, Eric? What on earth is this? I yelled, my voice breaking with a mix of incredulity and rage. Who the devil is this guy, Amanda? The man remained unflinching. He appeared, if anything, amused. My name is Dave, he said, as though we were meeting at a corporate picnic. I said the name again, Dave, and it tasted nasty. Naturally, Amanda, the co-worker, raised her hands in a gesture akin to calming a ferocious animal. Let me clarify, Eric. This isn't what it appears to be. Really? You seem to have been plotting this behind my back for a while. I snapped and waved my phone in the air. Tomorrow, return to him. Really, Amanda? Dave grinned once more, obviously taking pleasure in the mayhem. Calm down, dude. She loves you and the children. She always says that, doesn't she? All she needed was a rest. I went crazy. My hands tightened tightly. My fingernails sank into my palms. You expect me to just unwind while you're in my house, insulting me directly? Before I kick you out myself, get the heck out of here. Amanda put herself in our way. She spoke in a high-pitched voice. Stop, Eric. Simply stop. You're going overboard. Going overboard? My voice reverberated throughout the house as I barked. I'm overreacting, and you've been skulking around with him. Dave gave a shrug, evidently unconcerned. Look, I'm going out. This appears to be a private moment. He picked up his jacket and left the room, stopping at the entrance to avoid hurting anyone's feelings, dude. I looked back to Amanda as the front door clicked behind him. There was a mixture of indignation and guilt on her face. Talk now. I spoke in a calm, low voice, but I felt like a volcano about to erupt inside. However, what she said after that wasn't an apology. There was no justification. Everything would be different because of them. The defiance in Amanda's eyes ignited like a match as she crossed her arms. What do you know? Okay. You want the truth, Eric? I'm tired of acting like everything is flawless. I'm tired of bearing the burden of this marriage while you sit there in ignorance. I looked at her in disbelief. Do you mean me? I've been working really hard for you and us. She giggled and rolled her eyes. As you skulk around with Dave. Sneak around with a bitter attitude. You're quite dramatic. Are you even able to hear yourself? Dave does pay attention to me. He doesn't regard me as an add-on to his dull existence. Her remarks cut me like a piece of glass. We have 2 children together, Amanda. You claim that a life we created out of nothing is insufficient for you. She shrugged, her face unreadable. I'm just telling the truth. Eric, you are important to me. I need more, but I do. Something thrilling, something that doesn't feel like suburban suffocation. That word was like a kick to the gut. She was calling our existence a prison, and I reflected on all the late evenings I'd spent planning the mornings, packing the kids' lunches while she slept, and making innumerable concessions to please her. You're amazing. My voice was shaking with rage. You could have spoken to me and expressed your feelings, but instead you bring him into our home. Amanda's expression hardened. Eric, what's the point of talking? It seems like you're constantly on your phone, laptop, or work whenever I attempt. Are you even aware of my current situation? Alongside us? I moved in closer, my hands trembling. You have no right to try to turn this around on me. In order to provide you the life you stated you desired, I have been striving to keep this family afloat. It's your fault, Amanda, not mine if you're unhappy. A sarcastic smirk curved her lips. Oh, don't pretend to be a saint. You didn't want to acknowledge the gap, therefore you didn't notice it. For years, this marriage has been operating automatically. I tightened my jaw in an attempt to suppress the explosion that was building inside of me. Why in the world are you still here if that's how you feel? She replied, I know you'll always be there for the kids no matter what, and it's easier because you're stable. You are that person. Eric is dependable and consistent. I felt insulted by the terms predictable and stable. Instead of screaming and tearing the room apart, I stood motionless, staring at the woman I believed to be familiar, and I questioned Dave in a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper. What is your way of escaping the real world? She shrugged once again, and I was more enraged by that nonchalant gesture than by anything she said. He's entertaining. That's all. You are not in danger from him. He is not a substitute. He simply isn't the same. I chuckled, a distinct, hollow, bitter sound. He's not a brand new pair of shoes, Amanda. You've been skulking around with this man. She groaned as if I were the one being unreasonable, even though I've been working really hard to make you happy. Eric, I won't abandon you. I need this, but I care about you and the kids. I must experience life once more. Are you unable to comprehend that? I gazed at her, my thoughts racing. What the heck? As you walk out and feel alive with him, do you think I'll just sit here like a fool and take this? I expect you to realize that this doesn't have to change anything, she said in a cold and straightforward manner. I'll always be here for you, so you can stay here, be with the kids, and keep this family intact. What I was hearing was unbelievable. I'll just sit here and play house while you do whatever the hell you want. Isn't that right? I thought I had a glimpse of the lady I married when her expression softened, but her next statement dispelled that impression. After all, it's better than severing the family, isn't it? You don't have to like it, she murmured softly. After saying, you just have to deal with it, she turned and left the room, leaving me standing there in the ruins of my existence. The sound of the doors slamming behind Amanda echoed like a gunshot throughout the home. For a while, I could only stand there, grappling with the shock of her words. Her words echoed like a curse in my mind as I stood there with my fists clenched and my chest heaving. It's not required that you like it. You simply must cope with it. Take care of it. How was I to handle the reality that my wife, had just come clean about having an affair in our home and had the gall to claim that it was a necessary self-care measure? Instead of screaming and punching a hole in the wall, I dropped onto the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. My heart was beating so forcefully that I thought it might burst through my ribs. There was an overwhelming hush in the home. Every sigh of the wind outside, and every creak of the wood now seemed to be mocking me. I had created this life with her, and it was my life. Suddenly, with the energy rushing back into my body, I got to my feet. She pretended that this was usual, but I wasn't going to sit there and mope. With adrenaline pumping through my veins, I rushed out of the bedroom and down the stairs. As if nothing had occurred, Amanda was in the kitchen pouring herself a glass of wine. As I entered, her expression was placid, almost bored, as if she was waiting for me to stop having a tantrum so she could resume her evening activities. What are you doing? My voice was sharp enough to pierce the room as I demanded. She took a slow sip of wine and arched an eyebrow. I'm drinking. Is that now an issue? Her casual demeanor was like fuel to a fire. You can't pretend that this is the norm. You just confessed to cheating on me in our home, Amanda, and you still believe you can enjoy your wine and carry on with your evening. With a heavy sigh, she put the glass down, and it clinked loudly. What do you want me to do, Eric? That won't happen. So cry and ask for forgiveness. I've already given my explanation. I'm not sure what else you're looking for from me. I clenched my teeth and added, I want you to realize what you've done to our marriage. To me, am I just something else? Or do you even give a damn? I was tired of her tone being cutting and her visage being rigid. Don't pretend that I'm to blame for this, she retorted. You believe that you are the ideal husband. For years, you have been emotionally checked out. I've been ignored by you for a long time. You dare not include him in this, Dave. I snapped, my voice rising uncontrollably. He isn't a savior. He is a home wrecker and a coward, and you are insane if you believe he genuinely cares about you. Amanda's voice was cold, and her eyes narrowed. He sees me, at least. He gives me the impression that I am valuable, at least. Are you able to say the same thing? I felt like I was slapped across the face by her remarks. I was reminded of the evenings we had stayed up late, thinking about the future and joking about dumb things. Had we simply gone too far, or was all of that a lie? We went in search of our way back. I moved closer and lowered my voice, but the rage was still there, just underneath the surface, boiling. Why are you still here, Amanda? If you're so miserable, why don't you just go? Join Dave for some fun. How far does that get you? Knowing what she would be giving up, you, the children, the house, and the stability, caused her lips to twist into a chilly, resentful smile. Eric, I'm not a moron. I am aware of my priorities. Your top priorities, I chuckled bitterly again. I've kept this family together, Eric, she shouted back, her voice rising. Is that what you call this mess? Prioritizing me and the kids by running off with him whenever you feel like it? You ought to be appreciative of me for attempting to find anything that keeps me sane enough to stay, but you've been too busy being predictable. What I was hearing was unbelievable. She had so thoroughly misrepresented herself as the martyr in this nightmare she had conjured up. For a time, I didn't trust myself to speak since my hands were shaking. You know what, Amanda? I said in the end, you might be correct. Perhaps this marriage has not been going smoothly, but you're mistaken if you think I'm going to sit here and let you ruin all we've worked so hard to achieve. It's okay if you want to play games, but don't count on my cooperation. After turning, I left the kitchen, walking heavily on the hardwood floor. Her sarcastic voice trailed after me. Hey, Eric, what are you going to do? Seek legal counsel? I hope you can explain this without coming out as pitiful. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and I paused at the bottom of the steps. I couldn't respond, so I didn't. As the storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside my chest, I simply continued to walk and retreated to the bedroom. That night, I was unable to sleep. How was I able to? Every nook and cranny of my head was filled with Amanda's words, which swirled like poison. The silence of the house seemed oppressive. I tried to figure out when everything went so wrong as I lay there looking at the ceiling. All the memories were contaminated. I heard her footsteps at around 2 in the morning. Without saying anything, Amanda went into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and, as is her custom, started a cigarette. She had vowed to quit. Her face was illuminated by a flickering orange glow years ago, and for a brief time, she didn't resemble the woman I married. Can we have a conversation? Her voice was quieter than before, yet it still had that unwavering sharpness. For what reason? I sat up and rubbed my temples. How you've made the decision to destroy our lives, or perhaps how you're mentally defending everything. The bait didn't work on her. Rather, she said, you're angry, and let out a leisurely stream of smoke. I understand, but you should start acting more realistically, in my opinion. I chuckled, realistic but bitter. You're a brave person, Amanda. She looked over at me, her face unreadable. I recognize you, Eric. A nasty divorce is what you want to avoid. The children shouldn't grow up in a dysfunctional household. I don't either, so let's work this out. Work this out, I repeated incredulously. Do you want to negotiate the parameters of our marriage while cheating on me? Indeed, she stated plainly. I was struck into stillness by just one word. With the smoke swirling around her like a warped halo, Amanda leaned closer. Look, I considered this. I won't abandon you. You won't abandon me. The children don't deserve that, but my needs and desires don't have to cause havoc. We can maintain this family if you can simply accept it. Embrace it. I spoke incredulously, my voice trembling. You're requesting that I watch over you while you go out with him anytime you want. That isn't the case. Her tone was condescending. Now, Eric, Dave is not a danger to you. He is merely a conduit, something distinct. It has no bearing on what we now own. I raised my voice again. Nothing's left here, Amanda. You can't have it both ways if you treat it this way. She squinted. Why not? Many people do. They simply don't discuss it. Eric, I'm telling the truth. I interrupted, pointing a finger at her. If you can't handle it, don't. I'm trying to make this work. You have no right to attempt to make this seem honorable. You aren't a saint. This family is not being saved by you. It's being destroyed by you. She rose, taller than me, her visage steely and icy. Okay, feel free to discard everything. You are welcome to do so. Do not expect to escape this situation undamaged, even if you do call a lawyer. You believe that the courts are sensitive to your emotions. They'll take the mother's side. Every time they do, you will lose everything. Everything you've been working so hard for, the house, the kids. She said something that was like a sucker punch. I was aware of her correctness. Divorce wouldn't only be painful for me. Our children would be torn apart. This was not fair to Lucas and Mia. Amanda took advantage of my uncertainty when she saw it on my face. Consider them, Eric. Are you really going to drag them through a custody dispute over birthdays and holidays? I don't. Her reasoning and the harsh reality of the situation made me feel imprisoned and cornered. She took a seat again. Her voice grew softer. We can work this out. You just must let go of your urge to be in charge of everything. Believe me when I say that it doesn't have to alter our current situation. The term trust seemed like a nasty joke. My chest clenched with anguish, rage, and an increasing sense of hopelessness as I gazed at her. The thought of my children waking up to an empty house kept coming back to me, even though I wanted to yell at her to leave. Their parents were unable to keep their life together, thus they were attached. Amanda leaned in. Her voice was hardly audible. Consider it for them, for us. We've endured too much to allow this to destroy us. I couldn't, so I didn't answer. Rather, I stood up and left her sitting there with her cigarette and her ruthless, well-thought-out deal. I stared at the ceiling in the guest room for the remainder of the night, wondering how in the world I was going to proceed from this point on. Pale, subdued hues were painted on the walls as the early light slowly made its way into the space. I hadn't slept. Amanda's voice reverberated in my head each time I closed my eyes. For us, her words were poison, but consider it for them. They made no request for pardon. They insisted on obedience. Even worse, she wasn't totally mistaken. Children would be devastated by divorce, destroying the stability on which they relied. I detested her for forcing me into this predicament and turning my affection for our kids into a chain around my neck. Amanda was already in the kitchen when I entered, looking flawless, as if the bombshell from last night had never occurred. She was humming a gentle melody while preparing pancakes and flipping them with ease. My gut turned at the ridiculous normalcy of it. Morning. She spoke in a cheerful, informal tone, as if we were just another contented couple getting the day started. Disregarding her, I headed for the coffee maker. Eric, she murmured, her voice tinged with caution. When we are among the children, we cannot act like strangers. They will detect it. Grasping the edge of the counter, I turned to face her. You are amazing. After destroying our marriage, you're suddenly preoccupied with appearances. Exaggeratedly patient, she put down the spatula and groaned. Look, I understand your frustration, she said. Distressed, I raised my voice and cut in. You destroyed our whole lives, Amanda, and you told me to handle it myself. Distressed. It doesn't even come close to describing it. Her face grew stern as the pleasure dissipated. Eric, What do you want me to say? We both understand that we won't see him again. Therefore, I apologize that I won't see him ever again. So, what's the purpose of this discussion? I lost my temper. Why act as though you care about something that is obviously unimportant to you? I do care, but not in the manner you want me to, she replied, taking a step closer and narrowing her eyes. Eric, I'm being practical. This family can remain together. I chuckled sourly. If you stop making this about your pride. Amanda, this has nothing to do with pride. It's about respect, which you obviously lack for either me or us. Before she could answer, the stress was relieved by the patter of tiny feet entering the kitchen. Lucas and Mia emerged from the doorway. When they spotted the pancakes, their drowsy features brightened. Mom makes pancakes. Lucas ran to the table and exclaimed. A warm, motherly smile replaced any signs of coldness on Amanda's face. You're right, friend. Take a seat. It's time for breakfast. My stomach turned when I saw how easily she transitioned between roles, betrayer and mother. I joined the children at the table, forcing a grin for their sake. Even so, I was hardly able to touch the food in front of me. Amanda pretended nothing had happened as the morning went on. With a happy wave, she packed the children's lunches, gave them a kiss on the forehead, and sent them off to school. As the front door shut behind them, the mask came off and her face became serious again. We must discuss last night, she said, leaning against the kitchen counter. There's probably nothing more to say, I answered in a dull voice. There is much more to say, she shot back sharply. You must choose whether to cooperate with me on this or worsen the situation for all. Collaborate with you? I said incredulously. You want me to participate in this madness, Amanda? That is submission, not compromise. Anger flashed in her eyes. And what other option do you have, Eric? Turn the family upside down? Let the children pick between us? Is that something you truly want on your conscience? I tightened my fists as I stood there, attempting to control my breathing. She knew she had me in a tight spot. All of the options seemed like traps, but then I had a notion about a way out, possibly a way to make her own strategy work against her. Do you want my consent to this? I inquired, observing her response slowly. Indeed, she answered firmly. Fine, I said in a cold, purposeful tone, but with one caveat. I want access to everything. Your schedule, your messages, and your phone. I won't be kept in the dark about this if I'm expected to accept it. Her face flickered with mistrust as her eyes narrowed. Why? There cannot be any more secrets if this is to succeed, I said, calmly and deliberately looking into her eyes. Show that this is the greatest option if you are so certain. Let me see what I'm getting myself into. For a second, she paused. As she considered her alternatives, I could see the wheels turning in her mind. All right, she said at last, her voice strained. Okay, if that's what it takes to persuade you. She slid her phone over the counter in my direction after taking it out of her pocket. Look through it here. Proceed. As you can see, I've already told you everything. I retrieved the phone, my heart racing. This was my opportunity to obtain the evidence I required, to locate something, anything, that would allow me to regain control. I could feel her eyes on me as I unlocked the device and started looking through her texts, observing everything I did. I was not going to lose since the game had changed. Amanda's phone seemed to be carrying the weight of everything, and it felt heavier than it should have. Her serene, unrelenting gaze only served to heighten the tension, which I didn't want. The first thing I noticed when I opened her messages was how immaculate everything appeared. Her conversations were routine, with discussions about PDA meetings, grocery lists, and carpools. It was a meticulously edited account of her life, one intended to be inconspicuous. My fingers clenched around the phone as I browsed through her texts. Then, I discovered his name was Dave. Nothing particularly damning immediately popped out of the scant thread. Something didn't sit right, even though it was just a few light-hearted messages about work with emojis that now felt mocking in their innocence. If this was the genuine dirt, why would she so voluntarily allow me access? I returned the phone, pretending to lose. You seem to have done a good job of hiding your tracks, I said icily. Amanda grinned and said she had nothing to conceal, but she wasn't as astute as she believed. Already, the wheels were turning in my brain. She hadn't taken into consideration a point that I had seen. "You know, Amanda," I said, leaning against the counter, "perhaps you won't mind if I look through the phone records as well, given your level of confidence in everything." For a brief moment, her smirk faltered, but it was sufficient to validate my suspicion. "This is absurd, Eric," she said, her voice tight. "This witch hunt is not what we're doing. I handed my phone to you. What more would you like?" "Oh, you don't need to do anything more for me." I forced myself to be calm in my response. The service provider didn't seem to have all the information I required. "Just pluck the logs, please." She swiftly turned away, preoccupied with the dishes, as the color left her face. "Do as you please. You won't discover anything," she murmured, her voice muffled by the clatter of plates. Her response gave me all the information I required. I walked out of the kitchen, my thoughts racing. Amanda underestimated me, even though she believed she was in charge. Over the next 3 hours, I looked through her phone logs on the internet. Finding the patterns didn't take long. There were late-night phone numbers that weren't stored in her contacts but kept coming up, particularly on the evenings she claimed to be busy. One number in particular stood out. I quickly searched it and cross-referenced it with what I already knew, Dave. This was his personal number. The history of calls wasn't only regular. Obsessive, long calls during work hours, several calls in one evening, and hundreds of texts, sometimes separated by only a few minutes, were all part of it. As I gazed at the TV, my hands began to shake. As she attempted to frame it, this was not merely informal or enjoyable. This was calculated, intense, and purposeful. And then I discovered it. One voicemail was left a week ago. With my finger hovering above the play button, I paused. His voice pierced the room's silence when I eventually pressed it. "Hello, sweetie. It was amazing just to check in tonight. I keep thinking about you all the time. You don't have to, even if I know you mentioned feeling bad. You deserve to be happy since you're so wonderful. Tell me when you're free again, though. I already miss you." The room whirled. As the anger boiled over, I held onto the desk for support. The voicemail was not only evidence of the affair, it demonstrated her complete disregard for what we had constructed. I came rushing back downstairs, my heart racing in my ears. I shouted this in a low, trembling voice with barely controlled rage while Amanda was in the living room browsing through her tablet as if she didn't care to explain it. Her expression was cautious as she looked up. "Tell me why," I said, putting my phone on speaker and playing the voicemail. Every word Dave said pierced the very core of our alleged marriage as it reverberated throughout the space. Amanda's expression changed from shock to rage. "Digging through that was not your place," she said, standing up. She raised her voice. "No, correct. I lost my temper. You brought this into our home and into my life, Amanda. Don't discuss rights with me." She folded her arms, her face tightening. "Fine." And her eyes flared. For a split second, I thought she might try to make up another reason. "I was caught by you. Sherlock, congratulations. What are you looking for?" "A medal." The tipping point was her flippancy. The phone fell to the couch, startling her with the collision. "The truth is what I want," I yelled. "This half-baked crap about keeping the family together. I'd like to know why. Why did you think it was acceptable to discard everything for him?" I craved more, so Amanda stared at me and spoke in a knife-sharp voice. "I'm sick of being invisible, Eric. I'm sick of living my life as a wife and mother and nothing else. He sees me, Dave. He serves as a reminder that I am still alive." Her words struck more forcefully than any physical strike could. "After everything I've done for you and this family," I asked, my voice breaking under the weight of her betrayal. "How is that insufficient?" She hesitated, a brief moment of rage giving way to something like guilt. "Eric, it's not about you. I won't apologize for wanting to feel something again, since it's all about me." I gazed at the stranger in my living room, the woman I once believed to be familiar. My thoughts alternated between wanting to defend the family we had created and wanting to flee this nightmare. But I needed time for now. One thing was definite. It was time to plan and reflect. This wasn't over, even if Amanda might have thought she had the advantage. The following day, despite the sun shining through the windows, the house felt colder. The faint sound of the children's laughter as they played in the backyard didn't warm the space as much as it once had. Amanda went about the house as if nothing had occurred. Her daily activities were undisturbed by the internal conflict. She couldn't allow herself to believe she had won, and it was annoying how she continued to act as if nothing had happened. The pivotal moment had been Dave's voicemail. It was more than just evidence of the affair. It was evidence that Amanda had constructed her own world in which her self-interested needs came first, and now she expected me to put up with it in silence. I gathered myself during the day. I couldn't allow the fury to rule me, even though it was still there, seething beneath the surface. If Amanda believed she could influence me to comply, she was going to find out how mistaken she was. I had a plan by the time dinner time arrived. The children talked about their day while we sat at the table. Amanda was grinning and interacting with them as though she were the ideal mother. I played along, maintaining a light tone and a neutral countenance, but my thoughts were racing. I discovered her in the living room after the children had gone to bed. She had a glass of wine in her hand and was cuddled up on the couch, browsing through her phone. "We must speak," I said, standing at the doorway. She didn't raise her head. "Eric, we've already spoken. I'm at a loss for what else to say." "Yes, I believe there is a lot," I answered. To begin, I entered the room. "What you mentioned last night that caught your attention has been on my mind a little. I've concluded you're correct." After she put her phone down and cocked her head while observing me, I said, trying to seem calm, "I'm willing to think about your arrangement because we can't allow this to ruin the family." Her face flashed with mistrust as her eyes narrowed. "Just like that, really?" "Not exactly like that," I added, sitting across from her. "I've been considering the children. They are not worthy of suffering as a result. I'll take care of it if this is what it takes to save them from losing their family." She kept a close eye on me. "What's the catch?" her unreadable expression asked. "No catch. But we need rules if this is going to work," I remarked, shaking my head. "Regulations?" She reiterated, lifting an eyebrow. I spoke aggressively. "There can be no more surprises if you truly want to keep this family together. No deception, no esculking. Tell me where you are, who you are with, and when you plan to return home." She grinned. "Now you want to control every aspect of my life." "Transparency is what I desire," I said in a chilly tone. "I'm being forced to accept this new reality by you. I'm not going into it blindly then. You claim to seek truthfulness. Show it." Amanda reclined. She frowned thoughtfully as her smirk faded. After a long pause, she responded, "Fine. It's okay if that's what it takes to feel better. But you need to realize something, Eric. Control is not the issue here. It has to do with trust." Like a horrible joke, the word trust lingered in the air. I didn't answer, being aware that it would just spark more conflict. Rather, I gave a nod. "Excellent. Then we're in agreement." She grabbed her phone and went back to scrolling. I left the room with a somber sense of satisfaction, even though I was obviously thinking the topic was done. Amanda and I were not at all on the same page. I was ahead of her, even though she believed she was establishing the parameters of this agreement. I had spent the day getting ready, talking to a lawyer, getting access to all of our shared accounts, and creating a digital record of her adultery. I wasn't going to let Amanda gamble away, even though she might believe she had all the cards. The storm wasn't over, despite everything we'd erected without resistance. It was only getting started. Amanda woke up before me the following morning, singing to herself while making breakfast. She appeared lighter and almost arrogant, as if she thought the worst was over. I was repulsed by it. I marveled at her ability to transition between roles as I watched her from the doorway. Devoted mother, dishonest spouse, unrepentant, cunning, and in mourning. I murmured as I entered the kitchen in grief. Without looking back, she answered, "The coffee is ready." As she plated pancakes for the children, I sat down at the table and poured myself a cup. Moments later, Mia and Lucas bounded down the stairs, and the typical morning mayhem took over. But underneath it all, Amanda and I were humming with concentration. Unstated, but indisputable. I sat back in my chair and swirled the coffee in my mug after the kids had left for school. "We ought to discuss this arrangement in greater detail," I said nonchalantly. Amanda's demeanor was neutral as she looked up from her phone. "We have already spoken. Is there anything further to say?" I started to put the mug down. I believe that setting clear boundaries is essential if we are to make this work. She narrowed her eyes, as I mentioned, a little suspicious yet curious. What sort of limits? I said, leaning forward to begin. I would like us to be open about the implications of this for the future. Is there an ending in mind? Or do you intend to continue this relationship with Dave indefinitely? For the first time, I noticed a hint of discomfort in Amanda's face as her lips compressed. I'm not sure, she acknowledged. I haven't given it any thought yet. I need to know exactly what you require. What about what I need for the kids? I repeated, letting the words linger in the air. Does that even play a role in your plans? Did her face become stony? It does, of course, but you're behaving as though I've abandoned you when in fact I haven't. Eric, I'm still here. They still call me Mom. I still adore you. Did I just cut my voice short? Never claimed to love me. Not after your actions. She winced but got over it fast. She crossed her arms. This is about survival, not love, and if you can't see that, you may not be as flawless as you believe yourself to be. I wasn't going to let her ruin this discourse, even though her deflection was almost spectacular. Do you wish to live? I spoke in my own voice, chilly. All right, while you play home with another man, let's speak about how we manage to keep this family together. Would you like me to comply with this? After that, you'll give me something in exchange. In response, Amanda's eyebrows sprang upward. What are you discussing? I am referring to leverage. I spoke in an unyielding tone. You're going to provide me with the protection I require to safeguard the children and myself. But you're asking me to make the largest compromise of my life. She squinted. What does that signify? It indicates that I desire a post-nuptial arrangement in writing, I stated in a firm voice. I won't be left with nothing if this arrangement blows up in our faces. Do you want my help? Her expression turned pale. Then you're going to guarantee that the kids stay with me if this marriage falls apart? Her self-assured exterior crumbled. You are completely insane. She shook her head in agreement. Do you honestly believe that I will sign such a document? You have no other option, I said, getting to my feet. It was you who requested this arrangement. It's you who is gambling with our relatives. You shouldn't have any trouble writing it down if you're so certain that this is the appropriate thing to do. She gave me a scowl. She clutched the counter's edge, her hands shaking. Blackmail is what this is. No, I answered as I walked by her and headed for the door. It's survival. She was standing there as I left her, breathing in short, irate gasps. For the first time in weeks, I felt somewhat in charge and the balance of power had changed. In actuality, I didn't want this arrangement any more than she did, but I also wasn't going to give up easily and let her control my life. Amanda was due for an unpleasant surprise if she believed she could control me into obedience, and I was prepared for the same if she refused to follow my instructions. I didn't hear from Amanda again for the remainder of the day. I didn't mind the oppressive tension in the house. It was her turn now that I had made my mark in the sand. She was stuck in the bedroom for hours on end, only coming out to refill her wine glass or get her phone. By the time nighttime arrived, her quiet was more loud than any debate we could have had. I knew better than to let my guard down, even though I was psychologically tired. Amanda was calculating. She finally came downstairs around 9 p.m. as I was in the living room browsing through emails. She couldn't allow this power shift to go unanswered. She appeared to be negotiating a business deal with her inscrutable, cold, and aloof look. Let's have a conversation, she said. She stood with her arms folded. I put my laptop down and reclined in the chair. I'm paying attention. Amanda approached the couch across from me. She inhaled deeply and folded her hands in her lap. I gave your remarks regarding the post-nuptial agreement some thought. I didn't answer, waiting for her to disclose her strategy. It bothers me, she went on. It seems manipulative, as though you're using this circumstance to punish both you and me. I raised an eyebrow in response. You caused this yourself, Amanda. All I'm trying to do is keep this family intact. Her eyes narrowed, but she persisted. All right, I'll sign it if it helps you feel better, but I have restrictions. Circumstances. I sharpened my voice and repeated the edge. Indeed, she said firmly. It must be equitable if we are to make this work. Just because you're upset doesn't mean you have the right to rule everything. I said, sourly laughing. Amanda, You want to lecture me about fairness after asking me to live in a marriage in which you have a side boyfriend. She gave an eye roll. Avoid being theatrical. Here, I'm attempting to make a compromise, Eric. Although we both agree that it's merely insurance, you may still want the post-nuptial penalty. It does not imply that we are getting ready for a divorce. The fact that we are staying together for the children remains unaffected. The way she twisted the story was almost fine, almost stunning. I spoke in a chilly tone. Which conditions do you have? Amanda paused as though she was carefully selecting her words. No more intruding on my personal affairs. I should be allowed to manage things my way if I accept this. I clenched my jaw, just managing to keep from lashing out. While you cheat on me, do you want privacy? It's really rich. Eric, this has nothing to do with cheating, she snapped, raising her voice. It has to do with limits. Do you want a post-nuptial agreement? Then I need to know that you won't try to ruin my life or spy on me. Despite her astounding chutzpah, I nodded while maintaining a neutral demeanor. What else? Second, she spoke in a softer tone, we don't discuss this. There's no need to tell the children. It's not necessary for our pals to know. No matter what, we put on a united front. It hurt. Hearing her demand silence felt like the third betrayal. You must return your attention to this marriage. You've forgotten how to be my partner since you've been so preoccupied with work and other things. You must demonstrate your continued concern for me if you want me to stay. I jerked my head back in shock. You are amazing. You have the audacity to insist that I mend this marriage after deceiving me and cheating on me. Amanda maintained her calm voice and steady look. What are we doing here, Eric, if you don't want to solve it? My pulse was racing with irritation and rage as I gazed at her. I was astounded by this woman's ability to use gaslighting and manipulate every circumstance to fit her agenda. Amanda, do you know what? I said, get into my feet. You want your circumstances to be good. I will comply, but don't assume that I'm doing this for you. This arrangement is for the children, and it will end as soon as it becomes intolerable to me. She got her feet to look at me. All right. Neither of us made a move. Between us, the silence crackled like static. I spoke again as she turned to walk out of the room. Amanda, one more thing. She stopped and looked over her shoulder. The post-nuptial agreement will be drafted by my own attorney, I stated firmly. You will sign it without hesitation. There won't be an agreement otherwise. Although her jaw tensed, she nodded in agreement. I slumped back in the chair as she left. My hands were shaking. I didn't feel like I had won. This was not a victory. It was survival, plain and simple, but I knew deep down that Amanda's hold on me was eroding and that I wasn't going to allow her to regain it. I took the initiative the next day. I was already moving, while Amanda carried on with her usual air of confident detachment. The post-nuptial agreement was my weapon, not only a safety measure. I made an appointment with a lawyer, whom a reliable friend had suggested, as the first step in my escape strategy. It was focused, discreet, and professional. Let me clarify that the lawyer, Susan, was a perceptive woman who listened carefully as I explained my case. Her questions were keen, but her expression was unreadable. Your wife is openly having an affair, wants to keep the marriage intact for appearances, and expects you to agree to these terms without objection, she added, tapping her pen against her notebook. That's pretty much it, I responded, uttering the words out loud while experiencing a new wave of rage. Susan nodded, forming a narrow line with her lips. You're in a good position, Eric, but you'll need to have a plan. The post-nuptial agreement is a great place to start. In addition to securing primary custody of your children in the event of a divorce and protecting you financially, we'll make sure it has provisions that make it impossible for her to pursue any further claims. Is she going to leave? Is she aware that you are seeking my advice? No, I said quickly. She believes that I am either creating it myself or locating a generic design on the internet. I want things to appear as though I'm still cooperating. Good. Keep it that way, Susan ordered in a strong tone. She may lash out or take preventative action if she feels cornered too quickly. The following hour was devoted to creating the agreement's framework. Susan took great care to make sure every clause was perfect. Before I left her office, I experienced a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Amanda was waiting in the kitchen, drinking her typical glass of wine. I entered. Her expression was neutral but alert, and she looked up. "A busy day?" she asked in a cheerful tone, though there was obvious tension beneath. "Yes," I said nonchalantly, putting my keys on the counter. "I had some things to do." Her gaze remained on me for a moment before she returned to her phone, but she didn't press further. She was clearly attempting to read me, to see if I was still under her control. I pretended to relax when I got upstairs, but my thoughts were racing. I had to keep the flaws in my facade hidden from her. Not quite yet. The days that followed were a tight dance of civility. Amanda appeared to be trying to gauge my reaction by making small comments and digs, but I didn't fall for it. Instead, I assumed my part, remaining composed, helpful, and apparently accepting of her demands. The day finally arrived for the post-nuptial agreement draft to be completed. Susan was better than she had been. The document was a stronghold that kept the children and me safe. I printed a copy, put it in a folder, and took it home while giving Amanda a little leverage. I gave it to her after supper. "What is this?" Amanda inquired, examining the folder. "Probably the post-nuptial agreement." I continued in the same tone. "I even have a draft of it. I'll need your signature, so take your time going over it." She opened the folder at the end of the week and skimmed over the pages. As she read, her eyes narrowed and her face changed. "This is thorough," she replied slowly. I folded my arms in response. "Amanda, the children, and ensuring that this arrangement doesn't ruin anything else are the main concerns here." She gave me a harsh look as she looked up. "You're taking this very seriously." I briefly looked into her eyes and said, We simply gazed at one another, the silence laden with unspoken tension. After that, she placed the folder on the table and closed it. "I'll review it." "Good," I said curtly. I turned to leave the room, but her voice interrupted me. I turned around. "Eric, what you've altered." Her tone was almost accusing. "You've become harder to read." "Perhaps I've simply had enough," I answered in a firm voice. "Perhaps the moment has come. I no longer let you make all the decisions." She pressed her lips into a thin line, but said nothing. I walked upstairs and shut the bedroom door. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control over my life again. I was tired of following Amanda's rules, even if she may have felt she had all the cards. I was eager to win this time, since the game had changed. The following morning, it seemed as though the tension between Amanda and me had become ingrained in the walls of the house. At breakfast, she made no mention of the post-nuptial agreement. I could tell it was on her mind, even though she didn't bring it up when we met throughout the day. She was more reserved and cautious, as if she was carefully planning what to do next. By evening, the silence had become intolerable. I was in the living room, nursing a drink and going through emails after the kids had gone to bed. Amanda entered carrying the folder with the post-nuptial agreement. Her face was unreadable. "We must speak," she said, placing the folder on the coffee table. I pointed to the chair on the other side. "Proceed." Amanda did not sit. She stood there, crossing her arms. "I've perused the contract," she said, her tone changing. "I'm speaking in an impartial tone. It's biased." She lost her temper. "Would you like me to sign a document that deprives me of all influence in this marriage?" "Eric, this isn't an agreement. It's an attempt to gain power." Leaning back in my chair, I swirled the glass in my palm. "It's for the kids and my protection. Do you wish for this arrangement to succeed? Then you must demonstrate that you are committed to maintaining this family." Her eyes flashed with wrath as her jaw tightened. "Don't act like the kids are the focus of this. You're attempting to punish me for something you don't comprehend, and this is all about control." "Do I not?" I put the glass down with a loud clink, shooting back. "You brought this chaos into our lives, Amanda. You chose to ruin our marriage to suit your own desires, and now you're upset that I won't just give in to your demands." She moved in closer, raising her voice. "You feel so good about yourself, Eric, as if you've been the ideal husband for years. When I felt invisible, where were you? You were only concerned with your job, your bills, and maintaining appearances when I was pleading for a connection." I got up, my own rage erupting. Where had I gone? This was a family that I was supporting. I was giving up everything to offer you the life you want, Amanda, while you were out seeking connection. "You dare not." Her voice trembled as she hissed. You have no right to pretend that you have been a martyr. It took years for you to become emotionally absent, Eric. It didn't happen all at once. Her words were like a smack in the face. Yet you think that fleeing to Dave was the answer, and I'm not going to back down. You believe that lying covertly and treating me as a fallback option will resolve any issues. Amanda gave a sour laugh. It was a cutting, harsh sound. You're too preoccupied with playing the victim to notice the reality. This marriage has been checked out of you for a long time. Dave didn't take me away from you, Eric. You shoved me away. There was silence in the room. Her words hung like smoke in the air. When everything we had been avoiding finally came crashing down on us, neither of us spoke for a time. I refuse to sign it, she said at last in a softer but equally powerful voice. Not until you're prepared to acknowledge your involvement. I clenched my fists, fighting to control my feelings. Do you want me to accept accountability? All right. I wasn't flawless. I never cheated, but I did make mistakes. You were never betrayed by me. For a brief moment, I thought I saw regret flash across her face as her eyes softened, but it vanished as swiftly as it had appeared, replaced by the same icy resolve I had grown accustomed to seeing in her. Eric, this isn't about assigning blame. Her tone was almost patronizing as she spoke. It's about taking action. Perhaps you are the one ruining this family if you are unable to see that. I felt angry, heartbroken, and incredulous as I gazed at her. My chest clenched. How did this happen? How did the lady I loved become this stranger I couldn't recognize? You're amazing, I said, my voice trembling. You want me to go out of my way to accommodate your deception and betrayal, and now you're attempting to deceive me into believing that I'm to blame. A sour smirk curved Amanda's lips. Perhaps this marriage is truly over if that's your perspective, Eric. For the first time, the thought of ending it all felt real and tangible, but I wasn't going to let her take the story and change it to fit her needs. The words hung in the air heavier than anything she'd spoken before. No more. Perhaps it is, but if it ends, it'll be on my terms, not yours. I murmured, calmly meeting her eyes. Her eyes opened a bit, but she swiftly covered them up with a calculating, cool face. We'll investigate that, she said, pivoted, and walked out of the room. The revelation struck me like a freight train as I stood there by myself. I had lost the lady I married, and I was just starting to defend what little I had left. The days that followed seemed to drag on inexorably toward an inevitable end. Amanda didn't say anything to me, but I could sense her planning, the wheels churning in her brain as she attempted to think of what to do next. In the meantime, I diligently and silently lined up every component I would need to safeguard the children and guarantee my future. The post-nuptial agreement had served as a spark, but in order to put a definitive stop to this misery, I needed the fire. While I was getting ready for work on Friday morning, Amanda yelled out from the kitchen, "Tonight, Eric, we must have a serious conversation. Avoid being late." Her remarks seemed more like an order than a request, and her tone was sharp. I gave a nod. I'll be at home all day without seeing her. I could feel the pressure of what lay ahead. This was no ordinary quarrel. I wasn't scared, even though Amanda had finally understood she was losing control and that tonight would be her attempt to regain it. When I arrived home that night, I was ready for this. The children were already spending the weekend at my mother's house. It's Amanda's fault. The home was eerily quiet, I was certain. Amanda was sitting rigidly on the couch in the living room, sipping a glass of wine, when I entered the tense atmosphere. She motioned to the chair across from her and said, "Sit." With my expression composed, I sat with my hands folded in my lap. "What's going on here?" Leaning forward, Amanda put down her drink. "I'm prepared to make some compromises after giving the post-nuptial agreement careful study, if you're prepared to compromise with me." I arched an eyebrow. "Meet you in the middle? You believe you are in a position to negotiate despite everything you have done?" She persisted even though her face hardened. "Eric, I will not give away my rights. I'm willing to terminate things amicably if we can agree to maintain civility, but I won't do it to myself or the kids." It was as though the room had been slanted. I spoke sharply again. "Are you now discussing divorce?" "Indeed," she said. She spoke steadily. "This obviously isn't functioning. Our weeks-long argument has become poisonous for all parties. I believe it's time for both of us to acknowledge that this marriage is gone." The sound of my laughter was empty and harsh. "You've been dragging me along for weeks, saying that we should stay together for the children. And now you want to leave when you realize that you can no longer manage me." Amanda squinted her eyes. "I'm attempting to act morally. If you don't see that, Eric." "No." I stood up and interrupted. "You're not acting appropriately. Once again, you're acting selfishly, like you always have." She straightened her stance. "Do you believe that you are innocent in all of this? You've been aloof and unfriendly for years, and now you're blaming me alone. I might not be flawless." My voice rose as I spoke, yet I remained loyal to my family. I told the truth. I didn't expect you to accept that I brought someone else into our marriage. I denied her the opportunity to respond, even when her mouth opened to do so. "Do you wish to stop it?" I spoke in a chilly tone. "Okay, but you'll follow my instructions. I've already had legal advice. To safeguard the children, I have the post-nuptial agreement ready and the evidence of your affair. If you believe that you will leave with anything more than..." "You wouldn't, I?" Amanda's face went white, the color fading from her cheeks. "You entered this marriage with your delusions," I remarked, taking a step forward. "Amanda, you've been underestimating me for years, but no more." She gazed at me. For the first time, her confidence began to crumble behind her facade of control. "Let's avoid making this unpleasant, Eric," she said. Her voice wavered. "Consider the children." "The children are on my mind," I spoke aggressively. "I'm not going to let you drag this out any longer, because you want to end it. Then, on my terms, we proceed." It was deafeningly quiet between us. Amanda slumped back on the couch at last. She reached for her wine glass, her hands shaking. "What became of us?" Her voice was barely heard as she whispered. I didn't respond. I had nothing to say. The person I hardly recognized had taken the place of the lady I had loved. I stopped at the doorway as I turned to go, giving her one last look. "By Monday, I will have the documents ready. We will let the courts decide if you do not sign them." She didn't answer. She stared at the ground. I went upstairs and shut the guest room door after myself. I felt almost at ease for the first time in weeks. The conflict was over. For the first time, I could envision a future in which I rebuilt my life stronger and more independent than before. Amanda's reign of deceit and manipulation had finally ended.